I sat frozen in my childhood living room, staring at the paper Diane had just slid across the coffee table. The words eviction notice stared back at me in bold black letters. My stepmother's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the wood as she watched my reaction with cold satisfaction. 30 days, Tyler, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I think that's more than fair, considering everything. My half-brother Kevin smirked from his position near the fireplace, arms crossed like he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to mock me, illuminating my father's framed photo on the wall behind them. Dad had been gone for 2 years now, and clearly Diane had been counting down the days until she could make this move. You're kicking me out? I managed to say, though my voice sounded distant and hollow. Not kicking you out, she corrected with a tight smile. Simply asking you to find your own place. You're 28 years old. It's time to move forward. As she spoke, my eyes drifted down to the eviction notice. Something caught my attention, a detail that didn't quite match what I remembered about the house ownership. The name listed as property owner looked wrong, slightly different from the documents I'd seen years ago. I said nothing, but my mind started racing. My name is Tyler Morrison. I'm 28 years old, and I grew up right here in Denver, Colorado. If you want to hear more stories like this one, stories about standing up when everything seems lost, please subscribe to this channel. You won't believe where this goes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The eviction notice sat on my dresser like a ticking bomb. Around midnight, I finally got up and turned on my desk lamp, studying the document carefully under the light. The owner's name was listed as Diane R. Morrison, but something nagged at me. I remember my father showing me paperwork years ago, back when he first got sick. He'd been meticulous about his affairs, always telling me that preparation was everything. I opened my closet and pulled down a dusty box from the top shelf. Inside were old files my father had given me during his final months. At the time, I'd been too overwhelmed with grief to look through them properly. I just stored them away, thinking I'd deal with them someday. Now, as I sorted through faded documents and yellowed papers, my hands trembled. There were property deeds, insurance papers, and legal documents with my father's signature. One folder was labeled Trust Documents, Important. I opened it carefully, my heart pounding. The papers inside outlined a living trust my father had created. According to these documents, the house wasn't supposed to be solely in Diane's name. The trust named me as a primary beneficiary with specific protections. My father had planned for this. He'd known. The eviction notice suddenly felt less threatening and more like evidence of something much bigger. Diane wasn't just trying to kick me out. She was trying to take something that wasn't entirely hers. The next morning, I woke up with my father's words echoing in my mind. It was about 3 months before he died, during one of his better days. We'd been sitting in the same living room, and he gripped my hand with surprising strength. Tyler, promise me you'll protect this house, he'd said, his eyes intense despite his weakened state. I've set everything up legally. The paperwork is all there. Just promise me you won't let anyone take it from you. I'd promised, though I hadn't fully understood what he meant. I was too focused on the fact that I was losing him, too heartbroken to think about property and legal matters. Now his warning made perfect sense. He'd known Diane would try something like this. I spent the morning searching online for his lawyer. Mr. Howard Patterson had handled all of Dad's legal affairs for over 20 years. I found his firm's website and was relieved to see he was still practicing. My hands shook as I dialed the number. Patterson Legal Services. A receptionist answered. Hi, I need to speak with Mr. Patterson about my father's estate. My name is Tyler Morrison. My father was Andrew Morrison. There was a brief pause. One moment, please. When Mr. Patterson came on the line, his voice was warm but professional. Tyler, I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. Those words sent a chill down my spine. You remember my father's case? Son, he said gravely, I remember everything, and I think we need to meet as soon as possible. Mr. Patterson's office smelled like old books and coffee. He was a tall man in his late 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that had probably seen every kind of family drama imaginable. He gestured for me to sit across from his mahogany desk. Your father was very specific about his wishes, Mr. Patterson began, pulling out a thick file. He created a comprehensive trust to protect the house and ensure you'd always have a home. He was worried about exactly what's happening now. He spread several documents across the desk. I recognized my father's signature on each one. The house was placed in an irrevocable trust, he explained. Your father and Diane were named as trustees during their lifetimes, but you are the primary beneficiary. Upon your father's death, the trust should have been properly managed. Diane has limited authority to make decisions about the property, and she certainly cannot evict you. Relief flooded through me, but Mr. Patterson's expression remained serious. However, he continued, I need to warn you, about 6 months ago, Diane contacted a different law firm. They've been quietly working to challenge the trust validity. If they succeed in proving certain technicalities, she could gain full control. My relief evaporated. Can she do that? She's trying. And Tyler, time is critical here. If we don't act within the next few weeks, certain statutory periods will expire. Once that happens, her challenges become much harder to fight. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. Your father trusted you to protect this house. Are you ready to fight for it? I left Mr. Patterson's office with a clear strategy, act defeated while I prepared my counterattack. Diane couldn't know what I discovered. Not yet. When I got home that evening, she was in the kitchen preparing dinner. Kevin was watching television in the den. I walked in slowly, shoulders slumped, carrying empty cardboard boxes I'd picked up from a grocery store. Oh, Tyler, Diane said, noticing the boxes. Her voice was syrupy with false concern. I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I know change is hard, but it's really for the best. Yeah, I muttered, keeping my eyes down. I guess you're right. Time to grow up. Her entire demeanor shifted. She actually smiled, a genuine expression of satisfaction. I'm proud of you for handling this maturely. You know, once you're settled, we can still have family dinners occasionally. The audacity was breathtaking, but I just nodded. Kevin walked in, grabbed a soda from the fridge, and smirked at the boxes. Found a place yet, bro? There's some cheap apartments down on 5th Street. Might be your speed. Still looking, I said quietly. Over the next few days, I played the part perfectly. I slowly packed a few items, asked Diane questions about apartment hunting, and generally acted like someone who'd accepted defeat. She became noticeably nicer, even offering to help me move. Meanwhile, every night after they went to bed, I was in my room photographing every financial document I could find in my father's old files. Bank statements, property records, tax returns. I copied everything. Something in those papers would prove what Diane had really been doing. The bank statements told a disturbing story. I spread them across my bedroom floor in chronological order, and a pattern emerged that made my blood run cold. In the 6 months after my father's death, there were massive withdrawals from the estate account. 10,000 here, 15,000 there, 25,000 in one transaction. The memo lines were vague: home repairs, estate maintenance, property improvements. But I lived in this house. No major repairs had been done. The roof still leaked in my bedroom during heavy rain. The furnace barely worked last winter. The back deck was still rotting in places. I started adding up the numbers. Over $80,000 had been withdrawn in less than 2 years, all supposedly for home maintenance. Yet the house looked exactly the same. If anything, it was in worse condition than when Dad was alive. I checked the estate account current balance. Almost empty. Then I found something else. Statements for a personal account in Diane's name alone. I shouldn't have had access to these, but Dad had apparently kept copies of everything in his files, probably from when they'd first married and combined their finances. The deposits matched the withdrawals perfectly. Dates, amounts, everything aligned. The money taken from the estate account for home repairs had gone directly into Diane's personal savings. She'd been systematically draining my father's estate while letting the house deteriorate. I photographed every page with my phone, my hands shaking with rage. This wasn't just about kicking me out. This was theft. Sunday morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went to church with Diane. She was surprised but pleased when I asked to join her. Of course, Tyler. I'm so glad you want to come. Your father would be happy. The mention of my father from her lips made my stomach turn, but I smiled and got in the car. At Riverside Community Church, Diane transformed. She greeted everyone warmly, hugged the elderly members, and made sure to mention how difficult the past 2 years had been as a widow. People approached her with sympathy and admiration. "You're so strong, Diane," one woman said. "Managing everything on your own, taking care of the house and your boys. You're an inspiration." "I just try to honor Andrew's memory," Diane replied, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "It's what he would have wanted." I stood beside her, watching this performance with new eyes. Everyone saw a grieving widow doing her best. No one knew about the eviction notice, the stolen money, or the legal schemes. After the service, we were having coffee in the fellowship hall when an older gentleman approached me. Walter Simmons had been friends with my father for decades. "Tyler, good to see you here," he said, shaking my hand. Then quieter, "Can I ask you something? Your stepmother mentioned you've been handling the property tax payments. Is everything all right with that? I noticed the county sent a notice to the church directory mailing list by mistake last month." My heart skipped. What kind of notice? Delinquent property taxes. I assumed it was an error, but he trailed off, looking uncomfortable. I kept my expression neutral. "I'll look into it. Thanks, Walter." As we drove home, I realized Diane's carefully constructed image was built on lies that were starting to crack. That afternoon, I accessed the county property records online. Walter was right. The property taxes on our house hadn't been paid in over 3 years. The total amount owed, with penalties and interest, was nearly $18,000. But I had been paying them. Or at least I thought I had. Every year since Dad died, Diane had asked me to write a check for my share of the property expenses. She said it was only fair since I lived there rent-free. I'd given her roughly $6,000 annually, which she claimed covered half the taxes and insurance. I'd never questioned it. I'd never asked to see the actual bills. Now I understood. She'd been pocketing my money while letting the taxes go unpaid. If the county foreclosed, she could claim she'd tried her best as a struggling widow. She might even get sympathy for losing the house while actually having hidden the money I'd given her. But this gave me leverage. If Diane's whole strategy depended on maintaining her image as a responsible widow, proof that she let the house fall into tax delinquency while stealing from the state would destroy her credibility. I started compiling a file. I printed the county records showing the unpaid taxes. I made copies of every check I'd written to Diane labeled property expenses. I organized all the bank statements, showing her personal account deposits matching the estate withdrawals. It wasn't just about defending myself anymore. Diane had committed fraud, and I was going to prove it. I felt something shift inside me, from defensive to offensive. She'd started this fight thinking I was weak. She was about to learn how wrong she'd been. A few days later, I overheard Kevin arguing with Diane in the kitchen. I was in the hallway, about to head upstairs, when his raised voice stopped me. "You said I'd get half, Mom. You promised once Tyler was gone, we'd sell this place and split the money." "Lower your voice," Diane hissed, and I said we'd talk about it. "Nothing's decided." "Nothing's decided? You've been planning this for 2 years. You said once Dad's name was off everything, the house would be ours to do whatever we wanted with." I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. "Kevin, you need to trust me. These things take time. There are legal processes." "I don't care about legal processes. I've got debts, Mom. You know that. You said this house was going to solve my problems." There was a long pause. "Your gambling debts are not my responsibility. You made them my responsibility when you co-signed those loans. You said Tyler's money would cover it. Tyler doesn't have money. The estate has money, and I'm managing appropriately. By taking it all for yourself?" Kevin's laugh was bitter. "I'm not stupid, Mom. I see the deposits in your account. If you're screwing me over too." "Watch your tone with me," Diane snapped. "Everything I've done has been to protect this family. Tyler isn't family. You are, but if you can't be patient." I heard footsteps approaching, and quickly moved upstairs. But I'd heard enough. Kevin was starting to realize he was just another pawn in Diane's game. She'd used him, promising him money she never intended to share. That night, I lay in bed thinking. Kevin was weak and entitled, but he wasn't truly malicious. He'd been manipulated just like I had. Maybe that was something I could use. The next Saturday, while Diane was at her book club, I decided to search the basement. Dad had stored boxes down there for years, and Diane rarely went through them. If there was anything else she'd missed, it would be there. I moved through old holiday decorations and dusty furniture until I found a metal filing cabinet pushed against the back wall. It was locked, but I remembered Dad keeping a spare key in his old toolbox. After some searching, I found it. Inside the cabinet were files organized by year. I went straight to the most recent ones, from the months before Dad died. There were medical bills, insurance papers, and then, in a folder marked Final Arrangements, I found something that made my heart stop. It was a will, not the one that had been filed with the court, but a newer version, dated just 3 weeks before my father's death. This will specifically address the house trust and name me as the primary caretaker and beneficiary. It included detailed instructions about how the property should be managed and explicit limitations on Diane's authority. My hands shook as I read it. This document was clear and unambiguous. Dad hadn't just created a trust. He'd updated everything shortly before he died, obviously worried about what Diane might do. But this will had never been filed with probate court. Diane must not have known it existed, or she destroyed her copy. The question was whether this unfiled will was still legally valid. I carefully photographed every page, then placed the original back exactly where I'd found it. This was too important to risk Diane discovering it was missing. I called Mr. Patterson first thing Monday morning. When I told him what I'd found, there was a long silence. Tyler, he finally said, if that will is authenticated, it changes everything. Bring it to my office immediately. The deadline was approaching fast. I had 23 days left on Diane's eviction notice, and Mr. Patterson had confirmed that her lawyer was pushing for an emergency ownership transfer hearing in 2 weeks. She's trying to consolidate everything before you can challenge it, Mr. Patterson explained during our meeting. Once that transfer goes through, fighting it becomes exponentially harder. I sat across from him in his office. The unfiled will now safely in his possession. So what do? We file our own petition. We challenge the validity of any transfer and present this was evidence of your father's true intentions. But Tyler, I need you to understand, this is going to get ugly. Diane will fight back hard. I know. Are you prepared for that? Once we file, there's no going back. Your relationship with her and Kevin will be permanently damaged. I thought about the eviction notice, the stolen money, the unpaid taxes, and the lies. There's no relationship left to damage. Mr. Patterson nodded. All right then, I'll prepare the paperwork today. Over the next few days, I continued my act at home. I looked at apartments online where Diane could see my browser history. I even went to view a few, making sure to tell her about them. She seemed completely convinced I'd be gone soon. Meanwhile, Mr. Patterson was building our case. He'd hired a handwriting expert to authenticate Dad's signature on the unfiled will. He compiled all the financial records I provided showing Diane's theft. He documented the unpaid property taxes and matched them against the checks I'd written her. 3 days before the deadline, I received a formal notice in the mail. Diane had filed an ownership transfer petition with the county court. The hearing was scheduled in exactly 10 days. The next morning, she received her own notice. I'd filed a counterpetition challenging the transfer and claiming my rights under the trust. When I got home from work that evening, Diane was standing in the foyer, papers clutched in her shaking hands. Her face was pale, her carefully maintained composure shattered. What is this? She demanded. I met her eyes calmly. It's me standing up for what's mine. The court summons changed everything. Diane's mask of gracious widow disappeared completely, replaced by barely contained rage. She didn't speak to me for 3 days except to his threats when Kevin wasn't around. You have no idea what you've done, she said one morning as I got coffee. You're going to regret this. We'll see, I replied calmly. The hearing was set for the following Tuesday. Mr. Patterson had prepared extensively, organizing our evidence into clear categories: the trust documents, the unfiled will, the financial fraud, and the unpaid taxes. The judge will want to understand your father's intentions, Mr. Patterson explained during our prep session. We need to show that Andrew Morrison created multiple safeguards specifically because he didn't trust Diane with sole control. The weekend before the hearing, Diane's lawyer made an aggressive move. He filed an emergency motion requesting an immediate ownership transfer, arguing that the property was at risk due to family conflict and that Diane needed full authority to protect the asset. Mr. Patterson called me on Sunday evening. They're trying to force the transfer through before we can present our evidence. I've filed an opposition, but Tyler, this is concerning. If the judge grants their emergency motion tomorrow, we'll be fighting from a much weaker position. I barely slept that night. The thought of losing before we even got to present our case was terrifying. Monday morning, I sat in a courtroom for the first time in my life. The judge, a stern-looking woman named Judge Catherine Reynolds, reviewed the emergency motion while Mr. Patterson and Diane's lawyer argued back and forth. Finally, Judge Reynolds looked up. I'm denying the emergency transfer. This case involves complex questions about trust validity and estate management that require a full hearing. We'll proceed as scheduled tomorrow. I exhaled slowly. We'd survived the first attack, but the real battle was still ahead. That night, I couldn't eat. The hearing was tomorrow, and everything depended on it. If Diane's lawyer convinced the judge that the trust was invalid or that my father's intentions weren't clear, I would lose everything. Mr. Patterson had warned me about the transfer trap. If they succeed in getting the property transferred to Diane's sole ownership, even temporarily, the legal situation becomes incredibly complicated. Courts don't like reversing transfers. We'd have to prove fraud, and that's a much higher burden. I reviewed my own testimony one more time. Mr. Patterson had coached me on what to expect, what questions Diane's lawyer might ask, and how to stay calm under pressure. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was Kevin. "Tyler, we need to talk," he said. His voice sounded strained. "About what?" "Not on the phone. Can you meet me at Miller's Diner in 20 minutes? I hesitated, wondering if this was some kind of setup, but curiosity won out. "Okay." Kevin was already in a booth when I arrived, staring into a cup of black coffee. He looked terrible, exhausted and stressed. "What's going on?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. He was quiet for a long moment. "Mom's been lying to me, too." "What do you mean?" "All this time, she told me the house would be ours, that we'd split everything. But I found papers in her room, legal documents. She's planning to sell the house and move to Arizona with all the money. There's nothing in there about me getting anything." I watched him carefully. "And now you're suddenly on my side?" "I'm not on anyone's side," he snapped, then softened. "Look, I know I've been a jerk, but Dad was my father too, and I don't think he would have wanted this. Whatever he set up, it was for a reason. Why are you telling me this?" Kevin pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. "I recorded Mom talking to her lawyer last week. I thought it was about my share, but just listen." The recording was damning. I sat in the diner booth, headphones in, listening to Diane's voice discussing the ownership transfer with her attorney. "Once the transfer is complete, I can refinance the property and access the equity," she said. "The boy won't have any legal standing to challenge it at that point." "What about your son?" the lawyer asked. Kevin mentioned he was expecting. "Kevin will get what I decide to give him when I decide to give it." Diane interrupted. "Right now, the priority is consolidating ownership before Tyler can cause any more problems." "And the trust documents Mr. Morrison created?" Andrew was paranoid at the end. "Whatever he signed wasn't properly executed. My expert will testify to that." "What about the financial questions? The withdrawals from the estate?" There was a pause. "Those were legitimate expenses. If Tyler's lawyer tries to suggest otherwise, we'll argue they were necessary to maintain the property value." "The property taxes?" Another pause, longer this time. "That's being handled. Once I have full ownership, I'll settle the back taxes from the refinance proceeds." I looked up at Kevin when the recording ended. He was staring at his coffee. She was never going to give me anything, he said quietly. I was just useful for making you look like the outsider. Will you testify? I asked. Tomorrow at the hearing? He met my eyes. That recording, Mr. Patterson can use it, right? It's legal. In Colorado, yeah. One-party consent. You were part of the conversation. Kevin nodded slowly. Then yes, I'll testify. The next morning, the courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Diane sat with her lawyer at one table, perfectly dressed and composed. I sat with Mr. Patterson at another, Kevin unexpectedly beside us. When Diane saw Kevin on our side, her face went white, then red with rage. Judge Reynolds entered, and the hearing began. Diane's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a responsible widow trying to manage a difficult estate. He presented documents showing that my father had named Diane as his primary beneficiary and argued that the trust one was citing had never been properly funded or executed. Your Honor, Mr. Morrison created numerous estate planning documents over the years, often contradicting previous versions, the lawyer argued. The trust the respondent cites is incomplete and was superseded by the later, will file with probate court. Then it was Mr. Patterson's turn. He methodically presented the trust documents, the unfiled will, and Dad's clear pattern of wanting to protect the house for me. But the real bomb came when he addressed the financial issues. Your Honor, I'd like to submit evidence that Ms. Morrison has systematically mismanaged the estate, withdrawn over $80,000 for supposed home repairs that were never completed, and allowed property taxes to go unpaid while collecting money from Tyler Morrison specifically for that purpose. He presented the bank statements, the county records, and copies of my checks to Diane. Diane's lawyer objected repeatedly, but Judge Reynolds overruled him. I want to see this evidence. As the judge reviewed the financial documents, Diane's composed expression began to crack. Her lawyer whispered urgently to her, but she just shook her head, looking stunned. Ms. Morrison, Judge Reynolds said, looking up from the papers, can you explain these withdrawals and the delinquent property taxes? Diane stood, her hands gripping the table. Your Honor, maintaining a large property is expensive. I had to make difficult choices about priorities. While depositing estate funds into your personal account, those were reimbursements for expenses I paid personally. Do you have receipts for those expenses? The silence stretched. Diane's lawyer finally spoke. Your Honor, we can provide those at a later date. No, Judge Reynolds interrupted. This is a hearing about Ms. Morrison's fitness to manage this estate and property. These financial irregularities are directly relevant. I'm ordering a full financial audit of the estate before making any transfer decisions. Diane sank back into her chair, her careful plans unraveling in real time. The audit took 3 weeks. During that time, Diane barely spoke to anyone. She'd leave early in the morning and return late at night, avoiding Kevin and me completely. Kevin had moved into the guest room, creating an awkward truce between us. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies anymore either. He'd seen Diane's true nature, and it had shaken him. I always knew she was manipulative, he told me one evening. But I thought I was on the inside, you know? I thought I was part of her plans. We were both just tools to her, I said. The auditors came to the house, reviewed files, and requested documents. Diane complied mechanically, her usual sharp responses replaced by quiet, terse answers. When the audit report finally arrived at Mr. Patterson's office, he called me immediately. Tyler, you need to come down here. They found everything. The report was devastating. The auditors had traced every withdrawal Diane made from the estate account. Less than 10% had gone to actual home repairs or property maintenance. The rest had been deposited into various personal accounts, some in Diane's name alone, others in joint accounts with Kevin that he'd known nothing about. They'd also found evidence that Diane had used estate funds to pay off personal credit cards, finance a car, and even pay for a timeshare in Arizona, the same Arizona property Kevin had heard about in Diane's papers. She wasn't just planning to move, Mr. Patterson explained. She was using her father's money to buy her retirement property while letting his house fall apart. The report concluded with a recommendation that Diane be removed as a state trustee immediately and that restitution be considered for the misappropriated funds. But the real shock came when Kevin walked into Mr. Patterson's office that afternoon. "I found something else," he said, pulling out a folder. "Mom doesn't know I have this." Inside were communications between Diane and a contractor from 2 years ago. The contractor had submitted bids for actual home repairs: the roof, the furnace, the deck, totaling around $20,000. Diane had rejected all the bids as too expensive, while claiming to the estate account that the repairs had been completed. She literally chose to let the house deteriorate, while stealing the money meant to fix it, Kevin said. Dad would be devastated. Mr. Patterson looked at both of us. With this evidence, we're not just talking about estate mismanagement. This is fraud. 2 days later, Kevin handed me something that would become the most crucial piece of evidence in our case: a voicemail recording. I set up an old phone to record her conversations after I found those documents, he explained. I know it sounds paranoid, but I wanted proof of what she was planning. The voicemail was from Diane to her lawyer, left at 11 p.m. 3 nights ago, clearly after she'd had wine and thought no one would hear. "Bernard, I need you to understand something." Her voice slurred slightly. "That trust Andrew set up, I knew about it. I knew what he intended. But I also knew he was paranoid and sick, and judges don't honor documents created under duress. I modified some of the paperwork before he died. Nothing major, just adjustments that would make the trust incomplete. Andrew never knew. He thought everything was protected, but I made sure there were gaps, legal gaps that would let me challenge it later. There was a pause, and Tyler was never supposed to inherit anything. This house, the money, all of it. Andrew built it, but I've maintained it for years. I've earned sole ownership. If we can just get past this hearing and consolidate the title in my name, I can fix the paperwork discrepancies, and no one will ever know. Kevin thinks he's getting something, but he's been useful. That's all. Once I'm in Arizona, I'll be done with both of them. The recording ended. Kevin and I sat in silence. She admitted to tampering with Dad's trust documents. I finally said, "And using me," Kevin added bitterly. She literally said I was just useful. I called Mr. Patterson immediately. When he listened to the recording, I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "Tyler, this changes everything." She admitted to fraud, document tampering, and deception. This isn't just about estate mismanagement anymore. This is criminal. Can we use it? Colorado is a one-party consent state. Kevin was the intended recipient of that voicemail. So yes, it's admissible. This is devastating evidence. The next morning, Mr. Patterson filed an emergency motion with the court, attaching the voicemail transcript and audio file. By noon, Judge Reynolds had scheduled an immediate hearing. Diane's lawyer tried to argue the recording was taken out of context, but the judge's expression made it clear she wasn't buying it. "Ms. Morrison," Judge Reynolds said coldly, "did you tamper with your late husband's trust documents?" Diane stood, pale but defiant. "Your Honor, I was protecting assets that I had equal right to." "That's not what I asked. Did you modify legal documents without your husband's knowledge?" The silence was absolute. Diane's lawyer whispered urgently to her, but she just stood there, cornered. "I did what was necessary," she finally said. After the hearing was adjourned, Diane's lawyer cornered Mr. Patterson in the courthouse hallway. I watched from a distance as they had an intense, whispered conversation. 20 minutes later, Mr. Patterson called me into a private conference room. "They've made an offer," he said. "Diane will surrender all claims to the house and relinquish her position as a state trustee. In exchange, she wants a cash settlement, $250,000 from the estate, and an agreement that you won't pursue criminal charges for the document tampering." I stared at him. That's almost all what's left in the estate after her theft. I know, it's a substantial amount. But Tyler, think about what you'd get. Clear ownership of the house, complete control of what remains, and an end to this battle. Otherwise, this could drag on for years. Even if you win, the legal fees could consume most of the estate anyway. She stole from my father, lied to everyone, tried to kick me out of my own home, and now she wants to be paid to go away? Essentially, yes. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courthouse parking lot. I thought about my father, about his careful plans and his dying wish for me to protect the house. I thought about Diane's smug face when she'd handed me that eviction notice. "No," I said firmly. "She gets nothing. We take this all the way." Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. "All right, but she warned they'll fight every step. They'll file motions, request delays, appeal every decision. She said, and I quote, 'I'll drag this out until there's nothing left for anyone.' Let her try," I said. "I'm not rewarding her fraud with a payoff." That evening, Diane confronted me at home. She was waiting in the living room when I arrived, her face hard with anger. "You're making a mistake," she said. "Take the settlement. So you can retire in Arizona with money you stole? No thanks. I could make this very difficult for you, Tyler. Court cases like this destroy families, drain finances, ruin lives. Is that really what you want?" I met her eyes steadily. "What I want is justice for my father. What happens to you isn't my concern. Your father would want his family to stay together. You're not my family, Diane. You never were." 3 days later, everything nearly fell apart. Diane's lawyer filed a motion to dismiss based on a procedural technicality. Apparently, when Mr. Patterson had submitted the unfiled as evidence, he'd missed a required filing deadline by 48 hours due to a court clerk's error in processing the documents. "It's a technicality," Mr. Patterson explained, "but it's a real one. If Judge Reynolds is a strict proceduralist, she could dismiss the will from evidence entirely. Without it, our case is weaker." How much weaker? We'd still have the trust documents and the evidence of Diane's fraud. But the will was our clearest proof of your father's final intentions. It specifically named you as primary beneficiary and limited Diane's authority. Losing it would be a significant blow. The hearing on the motion was the next morning. I barely slept, haunted by the possibility that Diane would win on a technicality, that all of this, the investigation, Kevin's testimony, the evidence of fraud, would be for nothing because of a clerk's mistake. In court, Diane's lawyer was aggressive. "Your Honor, rules exist for a reason. The respondent had ample time to file this document properly. The fact that they missed a deadline suggests either incompetence or a deliberate attempt to manipulate the court's timeline." Mr. Patterson argued back. "Your Honor, this was a clerical error, not intentional misconduct. The document itself is authentic and critical to understanding the decedent's intentions. Justice shouldn't be denied over administrative timing." Judge Reynolds reviewed the file in silence for what felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked up. "I'm troubled by this deadline, miss," she said, and my heart sank. "However, I'm more troubled by the evidence of potential fraud in this case. Given the serious nature of the allegations and the document's clear relevance, I'm going to allow it under the court's equitable powers. But Mr. Patterson, don't let this happen again." Relief washed over me so intensely I felt dizzy. We'd survived. But that night, alone in my room, I realized how close we'd come to losing everything. Diane had almost beaten us with a technicality. I couldn't let my guard down for a second. 2 weeks later, Judge Reynolds issued her ruling on the trust validity. Mr. Patterson called me the moment he received it. "Tyler, we won. The judge recognized your father's trust as legally binding and acknowledged the unfiled was clear evidence of his intentions. You have majority control of the house under the trust terms." I felt tears prick my eyes. "So the house is mine?" "Not exactly. The trust is valid, but ownership is still technically disputed because of how the deed was recorded after your father's death. We have another hearing to settle the final ownership transfer, but this ruling gives us enormous leverage. Diane can't claim sole ownership anymore. It was progress, real progress, but not quite victory. Still, for the first time since this began, I felt like I was winning. That evening, I sat on the back porch where my father and I used to talk. The wood was still rotting in places. One of the many repairs Diane had never made despite stealing the money for them. I'd fix it soon, I decided. I'd fix everything she let fall apart. Kevin found me there. "Hey, congrats on a ruling." "Thanks. Thanks for everything you did too. The recording, the testimony, it mattered." He nodded, looking uncomfortable. "I'm still processing that Mom used me like that. Part of me wants to be angry at you for exposing it, but I know that's messed up." "You can be angry," I said. At me, at her, at this whole situation. It's all pretty terrible. Dad will be proud of you, Kevin said quietly. I didn't know him as well as you did, but I know he loved this house. He'd want you to have it. We sat in silence, two brothers who'd been pitted against each other, finally finding common ground in the ruins of Diane's deception. The legal battle wasn't over, but I knew now that I'd see it through to the end. For Dad, for myself, and in a strange way, for Kevin too, another person Diane had manipulated and betrayed. The news spread faster than I expected. Within days of Judge Reynolds' ruling, people at Riverside Community Church had heard about the case. Someone had access to public court records, and the details of Diane's financial fraud had become the subject of whispered conversations and shocked reactions. Walter Simmons called me. Tyler, I wanted you to know that several of us have been reviewing the church's records. Diane managed the fundraising committee for the building renovation project. Given what's come out in court, we're concerned there may be irregularities there too. My stomach dropped. You think she stole from the church? We don't know yet, but the audit's happening. Over the next week, Diane's carefully constructed reputation crumbled. The church ladies who praised her stopped calling. Her book club quietly suggested she take a break from attending. Even people at a grocery store treated her differently. Sympathetic smiles replaced by awkward avoidance. I found her in the kitchen one morning, staring at her phone with tears running down her face. They're all turning on me, she said. People I've known for years, people I've helped, they're all believing these lies about me. They're not lies, Diane. You've poisoned everyone against me, made me look like a criminal, when all I did was try to hold this family together. By stealing, lying, and trying to kick me out of my own home, she slammed her phone on the counter. This house was never yours. Your father married me, brought me into his life, promised me security. I gave up my career to be his wife. And then you spent 2 years stealing from his estate. I earned that money. Do you know what it's like to be a widow, to have everyone judge your every decision, to struggle to maintain a lifestyle you become accustomed to? Do you know what it's like to lose your father and then be betrayed by the person who was supposed to help you grieve? Diane had no answer. She picked up her phone and left the kitchen without another word. That Sunday, she didn't go to church. Kevin told me she'd stopped going anywhere except court hearings. She'd essentially become a recluse, hiding from the social consequences of her actions. Part of me felt satisfied, but another part just felt sad. Sad that it had come to this. Sad that my father's death had revealed such ugliness. The final hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in late September. Mr. Patterson had prepared meticulously, organizing every piece of evidence into a comprehensive presentation. This is it, he told me the night before. Judge Reynolds will make her final ruling on ownership. Diane's lawyer knows they're backed into a corner, but they'll try everything to create doubt. The courtroom was more crowded than before. Several church members had come to observe, curious to see the resolution of a case that had become local gossip. Walter Simmons gave me an encouraging nod from the gallery. Diane arrived looking haggard. The composed, elegant woman who'd handed me an eviction notice was gone, replaced by someone who looked cornered and desperate. Her lawyer whispered to her urgently, but she barely seemed to hear him. Judge Reynolds entered, and everyone stood. When we sat back down, I noticed Diane's hands were shaking. We're here for final arguments on the matter of Morrison estate ownership. Judge Reynolds began. I've reviewed all submitted evidence, including the audit reports, financial records, and testimony. Mr. Bernard, does your client have any new evidence to present? Diane's lawyer stood. No, Your Honor. However, we like to emphasize that Ms. Morrison has been a dedicated wife and has managed this estate to the best of her ability during a difficult time. Any financial irregularities were the result of confusion and grief, not malice. Mr. Patterson? My lawyer stood. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mr. Andrew Morrison created specific legal protections for his son and the family home. Those protections were systematically undermined by Ms. Morrison through fraud, document tampering, and financial theft. The unfiled will, the trust documents, and Ms. Morrison's own recorded admissions leave no doubt about Mr. Morrison's intentions or Ms. Morrison's knowing violations of those intentions. Judge Reynolds nodded. I'll review the final arguments and issue my ruling within 72 hours. Diane's lawyer stood quickly. Your Honor, before we adjourn, I'd like to request one final continuance to allow my client to. Denied, Judge Reynolds said firmly. This case has gone on long enough. You'll have my decision by Monday. As we filed out of the courtroom, Diane tried to catch my eye, but I looked away. There was nothing left to say to her. Monday morning, I couldn't focus on anything. I'd taken a day off work, unable to imagine sitting at my desk while waiting for the ruling that would determine my future. Mr. Patterson called at 10:47 a.m. Tyler, the ruling just came through. Can you come to my office? Just tell me, I said, my heart pounding. There was a smile in his voice. You won. Judge Reynolds ruled that the house is legally yours under the trust. Diane has no ownership claim. She's been ordered to vacate within 30 days and to pay restitution for the misappropriated estate funds. I sat down on my bed, overwhelmed. It's really over? The ownership battle is over. Diane's lawyer could appeal, but given the evidence, they'd almost certainly lose. Tyler, your father's house is yours. You protected it, just like you promised him. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. Then I called Kevin. We won. I told him. I heard. Mom's lawyer called her an hour ago. She's not taking it well. Is she there? Yeah, she's in her room, packing. Tyler, she's trying to figure out how to pay the restitution. She might have to sell the Arizona property. I felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sadness. That's not my problem anymore. That evening, I walked through the house room by room. It was mine now, legally and completely. All the memories it held. Of my childhood, of my father, of better times. They were protected now. Diane couldn't take them away. I stopped at my father's photo in the living room. I did it, Dad. I protected the house. Behind me, I heard a sound. Diane stood in the doorway, smaller somehow, diminished. Tyler, she said quietly, can we talk? Diane sat down at the kitchen table, without asking permission. She looked exhausted, defeated in a way I'd never seen her before. Her perfect makeup was smudged, her usually styled hair pulled back messily. I know you don't owe me anything, she began. I know what I did was wrong, but I'm asking you to hear me out just this once. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I'm listening. I never meant for it to go this far. When Andrew died, I was scared. I'd given up my career to marry him, and suddenly I was a widow with no real income. The estate seemed like security, like what I was owed for the years I'd put into this marriage. So you stole from it. I rationalized it. I told myself I deserved it, that I'd earned it by taking care of Andrew when he was sick, by managing this house, by being a good wife. But I know now. I know I was wrong. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. The restitution order, I can't pay it all. I'll have to sell the Arizona property and probably file bankruptcy. Kevin barely speaks to me. The church community won't have me back. I've lost everything. I said nothing, just watched her perform this final act of contrition. I'm asking you for help, she said, looking up at me with pleading eyes. Not money. I know I'm not entitled to that. But maybe some flexibility on the restitution payment plan? Or a written statement that could help with the bankruptcy proceedings? It was remarkable, really. Even now, even after everything, she was trying to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her, into making my victory easier on her. No, I said simply. Tyler, please. You tried to steal my home. You lied about my father's intentions. You committed fraud, document tampering, and theft. You manipulated Kevin and lied to your entire community. And now you wanted to help you face less severe consequences. I made mistakes. You made choices. Every step of the way, you chose to lie, to steal, to hurt people. Those weren't mistakes. They were decisions. Diane stood up, her brief vulnerability hardening back into anger. You'll regret this. When you're older and alone in this house, you'll regret not showing mercy. Maybe, I said, but I'll be in my house, the one my father wanted me to have. That's enough. She left the kitchen, and I heard her go upstairs to continue packing. She'd be gone in a few days, and I'd never have to see her again. Kevin appeared in the doorway. That was harsh. She deserved harsh. Yeah, he agreed. She did. 6 months later, I stood on the newly repaired front porch, morning coffee in hand, watching the sunrise over the neighborhood where I'd grown up. The house looked different now, better cared for, restored to what it had been when Dad was alive. I'd used some of the recovered estate funds to fix everything Diane had let deteriorate. New roof, repaired furnace, refinished deck, fresh paint throughout. The house felt like home again. Kevin had moved into his own apartment, but came by most Sundays for dinner. Our relationship was still complicated, still healing, but it was real in a way it had never been before. We'd both been victims of Diane's manipulation, and that shared experience had created an unexpected bond. You ever hear from her? Kevin asked during one of those Sunday dinners. No. You? She called once, asking for money. I blocked her number. We ate in silence for a moment. Dad would be proud of you, Kevin said, not just for winning, but for how you handled it. You could have destroyed her completely, but you just stood your ground. I didn't do it to destroy her, I said. I did it because it was right, because Dad trusted me to protect what he'd built. Later that evening, I sat in the living room, in the same chair where this had all started. I thought about the eviction notice, about Diane's smug certainty that she could take everything from me. She'd been wrong. Not because I was stronger or smarter, but because I refused to accept her version of reality. I'd stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when I was scared. The house was quiet around me, peaceful, mine. I hadn't destroyed Diane. I'd simply stopped letting her destroy me. And in the end, that had been enough.